The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the federal courthouse, painting golden streaks across the polished mahogany benches. Outside, reporters jostled with cameras and microphones, shouting questions at anyone who would answer. Inside, the atmosphere was entirely different. A thick, heavy silence hung over the courtroom, so dense it almost seemed to press against the walls. Everyone could feel it, the kind of silence that predicts chaos, the kind that makes people hold their breath without thinking. At the center of it all, 3-year-old Ava Carter tugged nervously at the hem of her mother's sweater. Her tiny fingers, knobby and pale, clutched the fabric so tightly that it left small white lines across the soft knit. She had been up all night with a fever, shivering under the weight of a blanket she refused to let go. But this morning, something stronger than fear or sickness had propelled her out of bed. A sense of responsibility far beyond her age. Today, she was going to speak. Her mother, Marissa Carter, held her daughter's other hand, feeling a sudden tightening in her chest. She could feel the heat of the courtroom, the tension crackling in the air like static electricity. Officers lined the walls, their polished uniforms reflecting the sunlight streaming through the high windows. They stood rigid, alert, watching the small child like she was some fragile glass ornament that might shatter under the slightest pressure. Marissa felt a wave of fear wash over her, but she steadied herself. She had promised Ava she would protect her, but now, watching her tiny daughter walk toward a courtroom filled with trained officers and a police dog named Coda, she realized she had no idea how that promise could ever be kept. Coda sat quietly near the center of the room, his ears perked, eyes sharp and alert. He was a massive German shepherd, muscles coiled under a sleek black and tan coat, and the kind of dog that demanded attention without moving a single inch. The officers claimed he had never disobeyed an order in 6 years on the force. Coda's handler, a man with a stern jaw and eyes that never seemed to relax, tugged subtly at his leash, keeping the dog close. But even from the corner of her mother's eye, Marissa noticed the dog's gaze, unflinching, unyielding, locked on Ava. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with sharp glasses perched at the tip of her nose, looked down from the bench, waiting. "Call the witness," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent that made everyone in the room straighten instinctively. The bailiff approached Ava, bending down so that his face was level with hers. "Do you know why you're here today?" he asked softly. Ava tilted her head, chewing her lower lip. She nodded once. "To tell the truth," she said, her tiny voice barely above a whisper. The courtroom collectively exhaled. The words were simple, but their weight was enormous. A toddler repeating words that adults might struggle to say under pressure, and every single person in that room felt it. The prosecutors whispered to each other, exchanging nervous glances. They had assumed this testimony would be trivial, almost comical, a sweet, innocent distraction in a serious case. But as Ava's gaze remained locked on Coda, the humor drained out of their thoughts. Even the defense attorneys felt it. Something unusual was happening. The child wasn't afraid, wasn't confused, she was focused. Marissa guided her daughter up the steps to the witness chair, which seemed impossibly tall for such a small human. Ava climbed, her little legs trembling, and perched herself on the edge, feet dangling above the floor. Marissa crouched beside her, pressing a hand to her back. "You can do this," she whispered. The judge nodded at the prosecutor. "Begin." The prosecutor, a tall man with graying hair and a sympathetic smile, leaned down to Ava's level, trying to appear gentle. "Ava," he said, "do you see the dog in the room?" Ava didn't answer immediately. She blinked once, then twice, before pointing a tiny finger directly at Coda. The dog's ears twitched slightly, but he didn't move. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Officers exchanged worried looks. The judge raised an eyebrow, leaning forward. "Yes, he's there," Ava said softly. The prosecutor smiled, trying to put the child at ease. "Do you know this dog, Ava?" Ava nodded again, more emphatically this time. "Yes." "Can you tell us how you know him?" Ava paused. Her brow furrowed, and she lifted a hand to her mouth, considering her words carefully. Everyone in the courtroom noticed. A toddler shouldn't be this deliberate. A toddler shouldn't weigh her words like they carry life or death. "I saw him," Ava whispered, "that night." The room went unnervingly quiet. The words were so small, so innocently spoken, but everyone understood they carried weight. The defense attorney leaned forward, skeptical, ready to dismiss it as imagination. "You mean a dream, perhaps," he said, voice slightly mocking. Ava shook her head. "No, real," he was helping. Marissa's hand went to her mouth to stifle a gasp. She had no idea how Ava could remember details that no 3-year-old should possibly comprehend. But she did. Her child's eyes, wide and unblinking, bore into Coda's like a tiny anchor, holding everyone's attention hostage. Coda shifted slightly, muscles rippling beneath his fur, and growled softly, low and cautious. The handler's jaw clenched. This wasn't supposed to happen. A trained police dog didn't react like this, not in the controlled environment of a courtroom, not with thousands of eyes watching. But Coda was reacting, and the tension that had been simmering since Ava entered was now a visible, almost tangible thing in the room. The judge leaned forward, her hands clasped over the edge of the bench. "Do you understand, young lady," she said slowly, "that you are under oath?" Ava nodded, her small chin lifting proudly. "Yes, tell truth." "Good," the judge said. "Now tell us what you saw." Ava's gaze flitted briefly to her mother, then back to Coda. Her little finger trembled as she pointed again at the dog. "He tried to stop the man," she said softly. Gasps ran like whispers through the courtroom. The judge's eyes widened slightly. The handler shifted uncomfortably, tugging Coda back, but the dog resisted, holding his ground. Officers in the gallery glanced at one another, some exchanging worried frowns, others gripping their notepads and papers more tightly than necessary. The prosecutor swallowed. "And who was the man?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Ava hesitated. She looked at Coda, then at her mother, then back at the judge. "He hurt Mommy," she said, her voice small but unwavering. Marissa's eyes filled with tears. She felt her knees weaken, but she gripped the edge of the chair, holding herself upright. The room seemed to vibrate with disbelief, shock, and fear. Everyone in that courtroom knew that something was unraveling, something dangerous and hidden that had been masked for months under carefully written reports and official statements. And then, as if on cue, Coda let out a low, deliberate growl, his body rigid. The handler tried to pull him back, whispering commands, but Coda ignored him entirely. Every eye in the room followed the dog, every heartbeat synchronized with the tension radiating from the small toddler at the witness stand. Ava's voice barely rose above a whisper. "He lied." The words hit like a physical blow. Silence returned, heavier than before, so thick it seemed to crush the air out of the room. And in that silence, the entire courtroom felt the truth teetering, on the edge of revelation, held in the small hands and steady eyes of a 3-year-old child, and the dog who had refused to look away. No one spoke. No one moved. The weight of anticipation, of unspoken danger, of truth poised to explode was suffocating. And somewhere deep in the courthouse, beyond the polished walls and expensive wood, the first cracks of chaos had begun. The courtroom's heavy silence didn't last long. It was as though Ava's words had ignited an invisible fuse, and tension crackled in the air like lightning ready to strike. Officers shifted nervously, uniforms creaking as hands brushed against polished leather belts. Coda remained rigid, ears pinned forward, eyes locked on Ava. His growl had faded to a low rumble, a warning more than a threat, but the unease it carried was unmistakable. Everyone in the room, judges, attorneys, deputies, and reporters, felt it. Something extraordinary was happening, and no one could have predicted it. Marissa Carter felt her chest tighten, a pressure that made it hard to breathe. She had always believed in truth, in honesty, in the idea that justice could prevail. But nothing had prepared her for this. Her 3-year-old daughter standing bravely before a courtroom filled with authority figures, pointing her tiny finger at a police dog and whispering words that could unravel months of official statements. The prosecutor, a man named David Ellison, leaned closer, lowering his voice to keep the intensity from overwhelming her. "Ava, sweetie," he said softly, "can you tell us what happened that night?" Ava blinked once. Then she blinked again. Her small, pink lips pressed together in thought, and she lifted her hand with hesitation. All eyes followed her tiny, deliberate movements. "I saw the man," she said. Her voice trembled slightly, but there was no fear in her words, only clarity, focus, a certainty that defied her age. Gasps filled the courtroom. Officers looked at one another, uncertain. The judge adjusted her glasses, leaning forward, sensing that what was about to unfold might not follow any script she had ever seen. The defense attorney, Richard Hayes, leaned back in his chair, smirking dismissively. He assumed this was just a child's imagination, that her innocence would render her account harmless and meaningless. He was wrong. Ava's tiny finger trembled as it hovered above Coda's head. "He was trying to stop the man," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was seismic. Every officer in the room stiffened. Coda's growl returned, this time sharper, more insistent. The handler, whose name was Officer Bennington, tugged the leash with urgency, whispering commands under his breath, but Coda didn't flinch. His gaze remained fixed on Ava, unwavering and intense, as if he understood that she was revealing something critical. Marissa's hand covered her mouth to stifle a gasp. She had never seen her daughter exhibit this kind of composure, this kind of fearlessness. Ava was small and fragile, with soft curls bouncing as she leaned forward, but her eyes, so wide, so clear, held a gravity that seemed impossible for someone so young. Marissa realized that her daughter was remembering things that no 3-year-old should ever have seen or comprehended. Yet here she was, articulating them with precision, clarity, and courage. David Ellison, sensing the moment, carefully pulled out a set of photographs from that night. Images of Coda patrolling the neighborhood, snapshots of his handler, and wide-angle shots of the supposed crime scene. He showed them one by one to Ava. "Do you recognize anyone here?" he asked gently. Ava's gaze flickered from the images to Coda, then to the faces in the courtroom. "Not him," she whispered, shaking her head. "The man outside." Her words hit like a hammer against the floorboards. The judge's eyebrows shot upward. Officers leaned forward, murmuring quietly. The handler's hands clenched tightly on the leash, his knuckles white beneath the strain. Every single person in that courtroom could feel the tension building, a pressure that was nearly physical, pushing against their chests, throbbing in their temples. The defense attorney jumped in immediately. "Your Honor, this is absurd. A 3-year-old cannot accurately recall events. This is imagination. It is hearsay. I demand that this testimony be struck." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Hayes, the child has been permitted under the law to testify. Let her speak. Objections will be noted for the record, but the court will hear the witness." Ava's mother swallowed hard, unsure whether to be relieved or terrified. Her daughter's small chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths, but her focus never wavered. She pointed again at Coda. "He helped me," she said. The words echoed in the room. Officers exchanged uneasy glances, whispering among themselves. How could a police dog, trained to follow strict orders, react like this in a courtroom? Coda was clearly not acting on instinct alone. There was something deeper, something intuitive, guiding him toward the small child who had witnessed something no adult had. David Ellison carefully guided Ava through the sequence. "Ava, did the man do anything to you or your mom that night?" Ava nodded once fiercely. "He hurt Mommy, tried to take her away." Her voice was quivering now, but her eyes burned with resolve. Coda stopped him. The courtroom collectively froze. A woman reporter clutched her notepad so tightly her knuckles were white. The judge's lips pressed together in a tight line. The officers standing near Coda tensed, their hands hovering near their belts. The handler's face had gone pale, sweat forming along his hairline. He whispered sharply to Coda, trying to regain control, but the dog remained poised, steady, and attentive only to Ava. Marissa could feel herself shaking. The truth she had buried under months of paperwork, under repeated assurances that the official reports were correct, had been exposed by the one person who had seen everything, her daughter. She wanted to scream, to run to Ava, but she knew the courtroom couldn't afford panic. Not now. Ava took a deep breath and in her small voice added, "He lied." The room went utterly silent. Everyone froze mid-breath, mid-movement. The two words were simple, almost childlike, but the courtroom felt as if it had been hit by a physical force. No one spoke. No one dared move. The gravity of a toddler accusing a law enforcement officer of dishonesty hung in the air like smoke, and it wasn't dissipating. Coda shifted slightly, stepping closer to Ava. His presence alone seemed to amplify the room's tension. The officer's eyes widened. Reporters whispered hurriedly into their recorders, trying to capture the moment that would dominate headlines for weeks. The defense attorney's smirk had vanished. His jaw tightened, and he glanced nervously at his client, the handler, who was fidgeting, tugging at the leash as if he could somehow reclaim control of the situation. David Ellison cleared his throat. "Ava, can you show us where the man was?" Ava pointed, finger trembling but unwavering, toward the corner of the room near a cluster of officers who were trying not to be noticed. "There," she said, "outside the window." A chill swept through the courtroom. Officers exchanged glances, unsure how to respond. Coda growled again, low and deliberate, not aggressive, but a warning that danger was present. The handler tried to tug him back, whispering commands under his breath, but Coda ignored them completely. His body was taut, ready, responding only to Ava. The judge leaned forward, her voice steady but filled with gravity. "Mr. Bennington, step forward. You will answer the questions posed by the witness truthfully." The handler's jaw tightened. He shook his head slightly, trying to avoid the gaze of the judge, the attorneys, and the child. But Coda's growl grew louder, a low rumble that echoed in the wooden courtroom, and the officers standing near the dog instinctively reached for the leash, steadying him without letting go completely. Marissa held her breath, squeezing her daughter's hand, feeling the tiny pulse of fear and courage radiating from her. Ava was small, vulnerable, and brave beyond comprehension, and Coda, the massive, trained, disciplined dog, was responding in a way that no one in that courtroom had anticipated. The tension was palpable, like static before a lightning strike. The room seemed suspended in time, waiting, anticipating the moment when the first spark of truth would explode into revelation. And everyone, from reporters to attorneys to judges to law enforcement officers, understood that the ordinary rules of procedure, decorum, and expectation no longer applied. All that mattered was the child, the dog, and the hidden truth that had finally been uncovered in a way no one could ignore. The courtroom was electric, every breath hanging in the air like suspended glass. Officers shifted uneasily, the faint scrape of leather against polished floors echoing louder than usual. Coda's low growl vibrated in the quiet, a deep rumble that resonated through everyone's chest. The dog was no longer just a K-9 witness. He had become a sentinel of truth, unafraid, unwavering, and terrifyingly perceptive. His handler, Officer Bennington, tugged at the leash with growing desperation, whispering commands, but the dog ignored him entirely. All eyes remained on Ava, the tiny girl whose courage now dictated the room's heartbeat. Marissa Carter gripped the edge of the witness chair so tightly her knuckles were white, trying to steady herself. She could feel the tension radiating off her daughter in waves, but she also sensed an unspoken power. Ava wasn't just recalling events, she was asserting a truth that no adult had dared articulate. Her words were simple, her voice small, but every syllable carried the weight of revelation. David Ellison, the prosecutor, swallowed hard and adjusted his tie. He could feel the gravity of the moment, the kind of tension that reporters live for, the kind of courtroom moment lawyers dream about but rarely encounter. He leaned toward Ava. "Ava," he said gently, "can you tell us what the man did that night?" Ava's gaze flicked briefly to Coda, whose ears were pinned forward, body coiled with alertness. "He tried to take Mommy," she whispered. Coda stopped him. The words rippled through the courtroom like a shockwave. Some officers exchanged nervous glances, unsure if they should intervene. Reporters scribbled frantically, fingers shaking as they tried to capture every word. The judge adjusted her glasses, leaning forward in her seat. Her eyes, usually so unreadable, betrayed a flicker of astonishment. Richard Hayes, the defense attorney, leaned back in his chair, trying to maintain a composed facade, but the smirk had vanished from his face. "Your Honor," he said, voice quivering slightly, "this is preposterous. A 3-year-old cannot testify to complex events like these. This is imagination, not evidence. I demand this testimony be struck from the record." The judge's gaze was piercing. "Mr. Hayes, the court has permitted the child to testify. You may make your objections for the record, but the witness will continue." Marissa felt her heart pound violently against her ribcage. Ava's eyes, wide and determined, never wavered. She seemed to understand the magnitude of her words even if she could not comprehend all the implications. There was something extraordinary happening here. A tiny child, barely able to speak in complete sentences, commanding the attention and fear of an entire courtroom full of trained adults. Ava's small finger quivered as it hovered above Coda's massive head. "He lied," she said again, her voice firmer this time. The courtroom gasped. The two words, so innocent on the tongue of a child, carried a seismic impact. Officers stiffened. Reporters froze mid-note, their pens hovering above paper. Even the judge's lips pressed together in surprise. Coda growled louder now, a low, deliberate warning that vibrated in the wooden floors. Officer Bennington tugged at the leash frantically, whispering commands, but the dog remained fixed on Ava. It was no longer a simple display of obedience. This was instinct, intuition, almost as if Coda understood the gravity of the revelation. The courtroom could feel it. The air was thick with unspoken danger, with the imminent unraveling of hidden truths. Ellison displayed another series of photographs from that fateful night, wide shots of the neighborhood, close-ups of shadows near windows, and blurred images of figures moving in the dark. Ava's eyes scanned them carefully. "Not him," she whispered, shaking her head. "Outside." The officers who had been present at the night in question exchanged uneasy looks. Some gripped their notepads, others tugged subtly at their uniforms, unconsciously preparing for something none of them could define. Bennington's face had drained of color. The dog growled again, stepping closer to Ava as if asserting his alliance with the child. Marissa could feel a tremor of fear ripple through the room, but also something else, a raw sense of justice finally being voiced. Her daughter, tiny and fragile, was becoming a vessel for truth, for revelation, for accountability. She held Ava's hand tightly, silently urging her to continue to speak without fear. David Ellison's voice softened, trying to guide the child without interrupting her courage. "Ava," he said, "can you tell us what Coda did?" Ava's gaze never left the dog. Her lips pressed together as she thought, then she whispered, "He tried to stop him. He barked. He stayed." Her tiny hands gestured to indicate the distance and movement, as if she were recounting a scene from a play. The courtroom fell even quieter than before. There was an unspoken acknowledgement. This testimony wasn't just testimony. It was an event, a revelation, and no one could predict its consequences. The officers' whispers had stopped entirely, replaced by tense glances and subtle, defensive movements. Even the court reporter paused mid-stroke, as though capturing the moment might break it. Richard Hayes leaned forward, voice sharp. "Objection, leading the witness. A child this age cannot testify reliably about such events." The judge shook her head slowly. "Objection noted. Continue, witness." Ava turned her gaze toward the judge, her small face serious. "He tried to hide. Coda saw him. He lied." Another ripple of gasps passed through the courtroom. Bennington's hands trembled on the leash. Coda's growl intensified, a low, controlled sound that seemed to shake the floorboards. The officers near the dog stiffened instinctively, their hands hovering, ready to act, though unsure of what exactly needed doing. Marissa felt tears prickle her eyes. She could not fully comprehend how her daughter had processed the events of that night, events that had been dismissed, downplayed, and buried under reports and statements. Ava had seen it all, remembered it all, and now she was revealing it with clarity and courage that transcended her age. Ellison stepped carefully, pulling out a map of the neighborhood. "Ava," he said, "can you show us where the man was and where Coda went?" Ava's small finger traced a line across the map, slow and deliberate. "He went there," she whispered. Coda followed. He stopped him. The courtroom was silent except for the low, continuous growl of Coda. The tension was almost unbearable. Officer Bennington tugged at the leash again, but Coda resisted, stepping closer to Ava in an unspoken act of allegiance. Everyone in the courtroom could feel it. The dog was no longer merely an instrument of law enforcement. He was a witness, a protector, and an active participant in unveiling the truth. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Bennington, do you understand that the witness has accused you of lying?" Bennington's jaw tightened. He swallowed hard, avoiding Ava's gaze, tugging the leash more firmly. I don't know what she's talking about," he stammered. His voice lacked conviction, his calm facade crumbling under the combined pressure of a courtroom, a child, and an extraordinary dog. Ava looked directly at him, unflinching. "You lied," she said again, louder this time. Gasps erupted. The officers shifted, some taking a half step back. Reporters whispered excitedly, scribbling every word, capturing a scene that would dominate headlines nationwide. Coda growled again, louder, more insistent. The handler's hands shook as he tried to assert control, but the dog remained unwavering, standing as an unyielding sentinel beside the small child who had seen everything. Marissa felt her chest tighten even further. Her daughter was a force of truth in a room filled with authority figures, some of whom were clearly complicit in what had happened that night. She had feared that no one would believe Ava, but now the truth was undeniable, reverberating through the room in the form of a 3-year-old's courage and a police dog's unwavering loyalty. The judge pressed her lips together, then adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Bennington, I am ordering you to step forward and answer the witness questions directly." The handler froze, a flicker of panic crossing his face. Coda growled once more, stepping closer to Ava, and the room collectively held its breath. And in that moment, every person in the courtroom understood. The ordinary rules had shifted. Authority, fear, and decorum no longer dictated the pace of events. A small child, speaking with unwavering truth, and a dog, trained yet instinctively loyal, had seized control. The entire courtroom teetered on the edge of revelation, and no one would leave unchanged. The courtroom had transformed from a place of order and procedure into a charged arena of tension and raw emotion. Every movement, every sound seemed amplified. Coda's low growl reverberated across the polished floors, sending vibrations that reached even the farthest corners of the room. Officer Bennington's hands shook visibly as he clutched the leash, trying desperately to assert control, but the dog's gaze never wavered from Ava. The small child sat upright in the witness chair, eyes wide and unwavering, an unspoken power radiating from her. In that moment, she was the anchor of truth, and Coda was her protector. Marissa Carter gripped the edge of the chair so tightly her knuckles ached. She could feel Ava's heartbeat, rapid and steady, pulsing in rhythm with her own fear and pride. Her daughter had already revealed more than anyone anticipated, yet she showed no sign of retreating. Ava's courage seemed to grow with every whisper, every breath of tension in the courtroom. The ordinary rules of power, uniforms, authority, age were irrelevant here. The truth had found an unlikely vessel, and everyone in that room sensed it. David Ellison, the prosecutor, took a careful step forward. His hands shook slightly as he held out the next piece of evidence, a series of photographs from the night in question. They showed the neighborhood in dim streetlight, shadows moving in unexpected ways and Coda patrolling. Some images were blurry, others were unnervingly clear. Ellison pointed gently to the shadows. "Ava," he said, voice soft but firm, "do you recognize anything in these pictures?" Ava's small finger hovered over the photographs. She squinted, leaning forward slightly. "No," she whispered. Then, after a brief pause, she said, "Outside him." Her voice trembled, but her determination remained. She pointed to an empty space in the images where no adult eyes could discern anything. The courtroom froze. Gasps rippled through the audience. Even the defense attorney, Richard Hayes, felt a cold dread creep into his chest. He had assumed a 3-year-old's imagination would be easily dismissed, but now it was impossible. Ava's gaze was precise, unwavering, and authoritative. Her finger traced patterns that adults had overlooked, revealing subtle truths that no one had recorded in their official statements. Bennington tugged at Coda's leash again, whispering harshly, "Sit, stay." But Coda resisted. The massive German shepherd's body was coiled like a spring, alert, loyal, ready to defend the child whose small voice had toppled the facade of a seasoned officer. For the first time in his career, Bennington felt the veneer of control slip from his grasp. Ava's mother swallowed hard, trying not to cry. The scene was overwhelming, her tiny daughter articulating events no one had expected her to remember, a dog reacting with intelligence and instinct beyond training, and a courtroom filled with authority figures teetering on the edge of disbelief. She could feel the room's energy shifting, the tension so thick it was almost visible. David Ellison guided Ava through the sequence slowly, asking her to explain what Coda did that night. Ava's hands moved subtly, tracing invisible lines in the air as if painting the events for the courtroom to witness. "He barked," she whispered. "He tried to stop him. He stayed." The words were simple, but their clarity and weight left no room for doubt. Coda growled again, his massive body trembling with anticipation, his loyalty unmistakable. The judge leaned forward, her expression a mixture of astonishment and concern. "Mr. Bennington," she said, her voice calm but firm, "the witness has made serious allegations. Are you prepared to answer them truthfully?" The handler swallowed, his face pale, beads of sweat forming on his brow. I don't know what she means," he stammered, avoiding Ava's gaze. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a subtle panic. Officers near him shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene or wait. Coda growled once more, louder this time, stepping closer to Ava, signaling an unspoken alliance. Marissa felt her chest tighten. She knew her daughter's small body and unshakable voice were commanding the room in ways adults could not. Ava had become the pivot around which the entire courtroom rotated. She was revealing truths buried under reports and official statements, truths that no one had dared question, until now. David Ellison continued carefully, guiding Ava without leading her. "Ava, did the man do anything else that night?" Ava's lips pressed together. She blinked slowly as if weighing her words. "He hid," she whispered. "Coda saw him. He lied." Her tiny hands clenched into fists as if to emphasize the gravity of her words. The courtroom was silent again, the kind of silence that makes every heart pound audibly. Richard Hayes jumped up, frustration overtaking his composure. "Objection! This child cannot be a reliable witness. She is too young to testify accurately about events she barely understands." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Objection noted. The witness will continue." Ava turned her gaze toward the judge, small but fierce. "He lied," she said again. The repetition made the courtroom shiver. Even the reporters, scribbling frantically, paused for a fraction of a second to comprehend the intensity of the moment. Coda shifted, growling low and deliberate, his body tense. Bennington's hands shook violently on the leash, but he could not command the dog to ignore the child. Coda's instincts had taken over, and the officer was powerless. The massive German shepherd was aligned entirely with the truth, and the truth was coming from a 3-year-old child. Marissa felt tears prickle her eyes. She had long feared that the authorities wouldn't believe her daughter, but here, in a courtroom packed with officers and journalists, the truth was undeniable. Ava's tiny frame radiated authority, her eyes held power, and the dog's instincts amplified the credibility of her testimony beyond question. David Ellison gently produced a map of the neighborhood from that night. "Ava, can you show us where the man was and where Coda went?" Ava's finger traced the path slowly, deliberately. "He went here," she whispered, her voice unwavering. Coda followed. He stopped him. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Officer Bennington's face had gone pale, his hands trembling on the leash. He had always maintained control, relied on training, and now he was completely powerless. Coda's growl intensified, signaling a protective, almost human-like awareness of danger. The officers nearby instinctively stepped back, unsure of how to respond to the uncanny alignment between child and dog. Marissa could barely breathe. Her daughter, so small, so young, had become the center of truth in a world dominated by adults who believed power came from authority rather than honesty. The courtroom had become a stage for revelation, and every person present was caught in its gravitational pull. The judge's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Bennington, I am ordering you to answer the witness questions directly. This is your opportunity to clarify the events in question." The handler's jaw tightened, panic rising in his chest. He shook his head, refusing to look at Ava. I don't," his words stumbled and broke off. Coda growled, stepped closer to Ava, and the courtroom collectively held its breath. The dog's posture, tense and deliberate, seemed to suggest that the handler was finally, irreversibly exposed. Ava's tiny voice rose slightly, cutting through the thick tension. "He lied," she said once more. This time there was no tremor in her voice, no hesitation. The words hung in the air, undeniable, undeniable truth carried by the smallest voice in the room. The courtroom seemed suspended in time. Officers, lawyers, reporters, and even the judge were frozen, waiting for the next moment, aware that the ordinary rules of procedure had shifted. The alignment between Ava and Coda had revealed something extraordinary. The facade of authority could crumble in the presence of courage and instinct. Marissa held her daughter's hand, trembling. Ava had exposed a secret that adults had worked so hard to conceal, and the courtroom had become a crucible where truth was undeniable, raw, and unstoppable. Coda's loyalty, instinct, and vigilance underscored the weight of the moment. The atmosphere was charged, thick with suspense. Every person in the courtroom understood that what had begun as testimony was now a reckoning, and at the center of it all stood a 3-year-old girl, unwavering, courageous, and utterly fearless. The room waited, knowing the moment of revelation was just beginning. The courtroom's air had grown thick, almost suffocating, with tension so dense it seemed to press against every person inside. Coda's growl had evolved from a low warning to a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated in the floorboards, alerting everyone to the gravity of the moment. Officer Bennington's hands shook violently on the leash, beads of sweat forming on his brow. The dog's massive frame remained coiled, muscles taut, standing unwaveringly beside Ava. The child's tiny figure, her small hands gripping the chair's edge, seemed impossibly strong in contrast, radiating a sense of justice far beyond her age. Marissa Carter's chest heaved as she tried to steady her breathing. She could feel the intensity of every gaze in the room, each one trained on her daughter. Ava's courage was tangible. It filled the courtroom like a force field that made people pause, rethink, and in some cases tremble. Reporters whispered hurriedly into microphones, cameras capturing every moment, their fingers shaking as they tried to keep up with the extraordinary scene unfolding before them. This was no ordinary testimony. This was a reckoning. David Ellison, the prosecutor, adjusted his tie and spoke softly to Ava, careful to maintain her composure. "Ava, can you show us what the man did next?" Ava's lips pressed together, eyes narrowing in concentration. She lifted a tiny hand and pointed toward the corner near the officers. "He ran," she whispered. "Coda chased him." The courtroom collectively inhaled. Some officers leaned forward, gripping their belts instinctively. Others exchanged uneasy glances. The idea that a toddler could accurately recall such precise movements, especially under extreme stress, seemed impossible. And yet, Ava's certainty, combined with Coda's visible reaction, made it undeniable. The dog's posture, ready, alert, protective, underscored her words with a level of authenticity that no adult testimony could match. Richard Hayes, the defense attorney, slammed his fist lightly on the table, trying to assert authority. "Objection," he barked. "This child cannot testify accurately to events she witnessed. Her age makes her inherently unreliable." The judge's gaze remained unwavering. "Objection noted," she said calmly. "The witness will continue." Ava's eyes, wide and unflinching, met the judge's gaze. "He lied," she said again, her voice small but steady. The repetition sent a shiver through the room. Even the reporters, scribbling furiously, paused to let the words sink in. Coda growled louder, a low, deliberate warning. He shifted slightly, stepping closer to Ava, signaling an unspoken alliance between child and dog. Bennington tugged frantically at the leash, whispering commands, but the dog ignored them. His loyalty had shifted entirely to the toddler who had seen everything. Marissa's hands trembled as she gripped Ava's arm. She felt a surge of pride, awe, and fear all at once. Her daughter, so small, had become a beacon of truth in a room filled with authority figures, some of whom were now visibly uneasy. The weight of the moment pressed down on Marissa, almost unbearable in its intensity. David Ellison pulled out a set of maps showing the neighborhood and the alleged paths taken that night. "Ava," he said gently, "can you show us where the man ran and where Coda went?" Ava traced her finger along the map slowly, deliberately. "He went here," she whispered. "Coda followed. He barked. He stopped him." Her tiny gestures painted a vivid picture, translating complex movements into simple, comprehensible terms. The room was silent, the gravity of her words sinking in. Officer Bennington's face had gone pale. His jaw tightened, his hands trembling visibly. For the first time, he realized that no amount of training, authority, or intimidation could mask the truth. Coda's instinctive alignment with Ava was undeniable, a living confirmation of the events that had transpired. The judge leaned forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Mr. Bennington, you are being ordered to answer the witness questions truthfully. Failure to do so will have consequences." Bennington's lips parted, then closed again. He shook his head, refusing to meet Ava's gaze. I don't know what she's talking about," he stammered, his voice trembling. Coda growled again, stepping closer to Ava, his massive frame a living barrier between her and the handler. The officers nearby instinctively shifted, unsure how to respond. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Ava's voice rose slightly. "He lied," she said again. This time there was no tremor, no hesitation, just unwavering truth. Her words hung in the air like a bell, resonating with clarity that no adult could dispute. The tension was unbearable. Officers, lawyers, reporters, and even the judge felt the invisible weight of revelation pressing down on them. Coda's loyalty, instinct, and intelligence underscored every word Ava spoke. The courtroom was no longer a neutral space of procedure. It had become a crucible where truth was the only force that mattered. David Ellison carefully guided Ava through the sequence of events, asking her to recall each moment. "What did Coda do when he saw the man?" he asked. Ava's small hands gestured as she recounted the events. "He barked. He tried to stop him. He stayed." Her words were simple, but they conveyed a narrative that no adult testimony could match. Coda growled in affirmation, his body tense, alert, and unwavering. Richard Hayes jumped up again, frustration overtaking him. "Objection. This child cannot provide reliable testimony. She is too young to recall events accurately." The judge shook her head slowly. Objection noted. The witness will continue. Ava turned her gaze toward the judge, unwavering. He lied, she repeated once more, her voice carrying a weight that silenced even the murmurs of the courtroom. Coda's growl intensified, a low rumble that vibrated through the room, signaling an instinctive recognition of danger and deceit. Marissa felt her chest tighten. Her daughter, so small, had become the center of truth. The courtroom had shifted around her, with every person caught in the gravitational pull of a 3-year-old's courage and a dog's instinctive loyalty. The ordinary rules of authority and procedure no longer applied. David Ellison produced another set of photographs, this time showing close-ups of shadows moving across the yard that night. "Ava, do you recognize these?" he asked. Ava's eyes scanned the images, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Not him," she whispered. "Outside." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Bennington's face was pale, sweat dripping down his temples. Coda growled low and deliberate, stepping closer to Ava as if to protect her from the man who had tried to hide the truth. Marissa's hands shook as she held Ava's. Her daughter had exposed a secret that adults had tried to bury, and the courtroom had become a stage for the unveiling of truth. Coda's loyalty and instinct amplified the credibility of Ava's words, creating a scene so extraordinary it would be remembered long after the trial ended. The judge's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Bennington, you are ordered to answer directly. This is your opportunity to clarify your statements." The handler's jaw tightened. He shook his head, unable to meet Ava's gaze. I don't," his words faltered. Coda growled again, stepping closer to Ava, and the courtroom collectively held its breath. Ava's voice rose slightly, cutting through the thick tension. "He lied," she said, her small words echoing with unshakable truth. Every person in the courtroom froze, aware that the ordinary rules had shifted. A 3-year-old girl, speaking with courage and clarity, and a dog, responding with instinctive loyalty, had seized control of the narrative. The courtroom teetered on the edge of revelation, and no one would leave unchanged. Marissa held her daughter tightly, trembling. Ava had exposed a hidden truth that adults had tried to conceal, and the courtroom had become a crucible where the power of honesty, instinct, and courage had overtaken authority. Coda's presence made the truth undeniable, and every person in that room knew it. The tension was electric, thick with anticipation. Every eye was on the small girl and the dog who had become her shield. The ordinary rules of decorum, fear, and authority had evaporated, replaced by a raw, undeniable force. The truth, revealed through the courage of a 3-year-old and the instincts of a loyal dog. And in that suspended moment the courtroom waited, holding its collective breath, knowing that the next revelation would change everything. The courtroom was no longer a place of procedure or protocol. It had become a stage of revelation, every heartbeat amplified by the tension that hung in the air like a storm about to break. Coda, the massive German shepherd, remained coiled beside Ava, growling low, a sound that resonated through the polished wooden floors. His body was a taut spring, ready to act, a living signal of the truth he instinctively recognized. Officer Bennington's hands shook on the leash, his face pale and strained as he realized the tide of authority had shifted entirely. Marissa Carter's heart raced violently, her chest tight with fear, pride, and awe. Her tiny daughter, barely 3 years old, had taken control of a room packed with trained officers, seasoned attorneys, and a presiding judge. Ava's words were precise, deliberate, and terrifyingly clear. He lied. The repetition of those 3 words had fractured the carefully constructed facade that Bennington had maintained for months, exposing him for the first time to public scrutiny. David Ellison leaned down toward Ava, his voice gentle but steady. "Ava, can you show us exactly what the man did after Coda stopped him?" Ava's lips pressed together, her brow furrowed in concentration. She lifted a tiny hand and pointed toward a corner near the officers. "He tried to hide," she whispered. Coda found him. He barked. He stayed. Her gestures were precise, almost choreographed, illustrating the movements with clarity that left the courtroom speechless. The officers standing near Bennington exchanged worried glances. Some gripped their notebooks, others instinctively reached toward their belts, unsure how to respond to a situation that defied every expectation of control and procedure. Bennington tugged frantically on Coda's leash, whispering commands, but the dog's loyalty was complete, unwavering, absolute. The handler was powerless before the bond between child and dog, the silent authority of instinct and truth. Richard Hayes, the defense attorney, slammed his fist on the table in frustration. "Objection," he barked. "A 3-year-old cannot provide reliable testimony. This is imagination, not evidence." The judge adjusted her glasses and shook her head slowly. "Objection noted. The witness will continue." Ava's small eyes met the judge's gaze. "He lied," she said again, her voice clear and unwavering. Coda growled in affirmation, low and deliberate, his massive body vibrating with the same intensity as the child's words. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath, every person aware that the ordinary rules of authority had been suspended. Marissa gripped Ava's hand, feeling her tiny fingers tremble slightly. She realized that her daughter was not just recounting events. She was commanding the attention of every adult in the room, shaping the narrative with courage and clarity no one could ignore. The truth, once hidden, was emerging, carried by innocence and instinct, and it was impossible to suppress. David Ellison produced a series of photographs, showing shadows moving across the yard from the night in question. "Ava," he said, "do you see the man in these pictures?" Ava's eyes scanned the images, narrowing in concentration. "Not him," she whispered. "Outside." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Bennington's face had drained of color, his hands trembling violently. Coda growled again, stepping closer to Ava, signaling his allegiance. The courtroom collectively held its breath, aware that the dog's instincts were amplifying the truth in a way that no testimony, no document, could replicate. David Ellison produced a map of the neighborhood. "Ava, can you show us where the man went and where Coda followed?" Ava's finger traced a deliberate path across the map. "He went here," she whispered. "Coda chased him. He stopped him." Her tiny gestures painted a vivid scene, converting complex events into simple, understandable visual cues. The courtroom was silent, everyone absorbing the significance of the child's account. Officer Bennington's composure was cracking. He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. I don't," his voice faltered as he avoided Ava's unwavering gaze. Coda growled low and insistent, stepping closer to the small child, signaling that the handler's words held no sway over reality. Marissa's chest tightened. The child had exposed a secret that no adult had dared confront, and the courtroom had become a crucible where truth was undeniable. Coda's loyalty underscored every word Ava spoke, leaving no room for doubt. The ordinary rules of authority had evaporated. Only courage and instinct now governed the room. David Ellison asked carefully, "Ava, what did Coda do when he saw the man?" Ava's small hands mimicked the dog's actions. "He barked. He tried to stop him. He stayed." The precision of her account stunned the courtroom. Even the judge, typically reserved and composed, leaned forward slightly, her eyes widening in disbelief. Coda growled in affirmation, his posture reinforcing the child's narrative. Richard Hayes jumped up again. "Objection. This child is too young. Her testimony is unreliable and cannot be used in court." The judge's voice was steady. "Objection noted. The witness will continue." Ava's gaze met the judge again. "He lied," she repeated, her small voice unwavering, each word dripping with clarity. Coda growled louder this time, a deep rumble that vibrated through the room. Officer Bennington's hands shook violently on the leash. He realized finally that no training, authority, or intimidation could counter the combined power of a child's memory and a dog's instinct. Marissa felt a mixture of fear, pride, and awe. Her daughter had become the center of truth, and the courtroom had shifted entirely. Authority, protocol, and procedure no longer dictated the narrative. Courage and instinct did. David Ellison produced another set of photographs. "Ava, can you show us where the man hid?" Ava's eyes scanned the images carefully, then she pointed toward a shadowy corner. "Here," she whispered. "Coda found him." The courtroom fell silent. Bennington's face was pale, his hands trembling on the leash. Coda growled again, stepping closer to Ava, signaling that the truth had been revealed and could not be denied. Officers exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene or wait. The tension was almost unbearable. Marissa gripped Ava's hand tightly. Her daughter had revealed the truth that adults had tried to bury, and Coda's instincts amplified its credibility. The courtroom was a crucible of raw emotion, suspense, and revelation. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Bennington, you are ordered to answer directly. This is your opportunity to clarify your statements." Bennington's jaw tightened. He shook his head, refusing to meet Ava's gaze. I don't," his words faltered. Coda growled again, stepping closer to Ava. The courtroom collectively held its breath, knowing the handler's facade was crumbling. Ava's tiny voice rose slightly. "He lied," she said, her words echoing with unshakable truth. Every person in the courtroom froze, aware that the ordinary rules had shifted. A 3-year-old, speaking with clarity and courage, and a dog, responding with instinctive loyalty, had seized control of the narrative. The courtroom teetered on the edge of revelation, and no one would leave unchanged. Marissa held her daughter tightly, trembling. Ava had exposed a hidden truth that adults had tried to conceal, and the courtroom had become a crucible where honesty, instinct, and courage overpowered authority. Coda's presence made the truth undeniable, and every person in that room knew it. The tension was electric, thick with anticipation. Every eye was on the small girl and the dog who had become her shield. The ordinary rules of decorum, fear, and authority had vanished, replaced by a raw, unstoppable force. The truth, revealed through the courage of a 3-year-old and the instincts of a loyal dog. And in that suspended moment, everyone knew the next revelation would shatter everything. The courtroom had become a storm of tension, every heartbeat amplified, every breath a potential rupture of the fragile calm. Coda, the massive German shepherd, stood like a living sentinel beside Ava, his eyes locked on Officer Bennington, growling low and deliberate, vibrating through the polished wooden floors. The dog's body was taut, a living embodiment of instinct, loyalty, and unflinching judgment. Ava, barely 3 years old, sat upright in the witness chair, her small hands gripping the edge, her eyes fierce and unwavering. The room seemed to orbit around her tiny figure, suspended in the gravity of truth she carried. Marissa Carter felt her chest tighten so severely it was hard to breathe. Her daughter had become the fulcrum of justice in a courtroom packed with seasoned officers, lawyers, and a presiding judge. Ava's words, simple, clear, and repeated with unwavering certainty, had begun to unravel a carefully constructed facade. "He lied," she said again, and the courtroom collectively shuddered under the weight of those 3 words. David Ellison, the prosecutor, leaned down, careful not to intimidate the child but to guide her through the next phase. "Ava," he said softly, "can you tell us what the man did when Coda chased him?" Ava's lips pressed together, her tiny brow furrowed in concentration. She lifted a small hand and pointed toward a corner near the officers. "He tried to hide," she whispered. Coda barked. "He stayed." Her gestures painted a vivid scene that transcended words, translating complex events into a simple, undeniable truth. The courtroom's atmosphere was electric. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, and officers exchanged uneasy glances. Even seasoned professionals felt a ripple of unease. They had never witnessed a child wield authority in a room filled with adult power, and certainly not with a dog amplifying every truth she spoke. Richard Hayes, the defense attorney, slammed his fist on the table. "Objection," he barked. "A 3-year-old cannot provide accurate testimony. She is unreliable." The judge shook her head slowly. "Objection noted. The witness will continue." Ava's small eyes met the judge's gaze. "He lied," she said again, her voice unwavering. Coda growled, a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated through the room, reinforcing the truth of her words. Officer Bennington's hands shook violently as he gripped the leash. He realized that the ordinary levers of control, training, authority, intimidation, were powerless against a child's courage and a dog's instinct. Marissa gripped Ava's hand tightly, feeling the weight of the moment. Her daughter's voice was small, but it carried a force that no adult could ignore. Truth, previously buried under reports and denials, was now manifest, amplified by the uncanny alignment between child and canine. The courtroom had become a crucible where lies were exposed, and courage and instinct dictated the flow of events. David Ellison carefully guided Ava through a series of questions about the events that night. "What did Coda do when he saw the man?" he asked. Ava's small hands mimicked the dog's actions. "He barked, he chased, he stopped him," she said, her tiny voice clear and precise. Coda growled in affirmation, his body tense, alert, unwavering. Every gesture, every sound confirmed Ava's testimony. Richard Hayes jumped up again, frustration breaking through his composure. "Objection! The child is too young. Her testimony cannot be reliable." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Objection noted. The witness will continue." Ava's gaze met the judge. "He lied," she repeated, louder this time, her small words carrying seismic weight. Coda growled, stepping closer to Ava, reinforcing her words with physical presence. The courtroom seemed to vibrate under the alignment of child and dog, an energy so raw and undeniable it left no room for denial. Marissa's chest tightened. She realized her daughter had become the center of a storm, a pivot of truth in a room dominated by adults. Every person in the courtroom, from officers to reporters to the judge herself, was caught in the gravitational pull of Ava's courage and Coda's instinct. The ordinary rules of authority and procedure had evaporated. David Ellison pulled out photographs showing shadows moving across the yard that night. "Ava, do you recognize the man in these images?" Ava's eyes scanned the photographs. She shook her head slowly. "Not him," she whispered. "Outside." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Bennington's face had drained of color, his hands trembling violently on the leash. Coda growled again, stepping closer to Ava. The alignment between child and dog was unmistakable. David Ellison then spread a map of the neighborhood. "Ava, can you show us where the man went and where Coda followed?" Ava's tiny finger traced the path slowly, deliberately. "He went here," she whispered. "Coda chased him. He stopped him." Her gestures were precise, translating complex events into a narrative everyone could understand. The courtroom was silent, absorbing the undeniable weight of the child's testimony. Officer Bennington's panic was palpable. He realized the facade he had maintained was crumbling, and Coda's unwavering loyalty to Ava made him powerless. The courtroom collectively held its breath, sensing the approaching moment of revelation. David Ellison asked carefully, "Ava, what did Coda do when he saw the man hiding?" Ava's hands moved, showing the dog's actions. "He barked. He stayed. He didn't move until the man came out." Coda growled in affirmation, stepping closer to Ava. The courtroom shivered under the intensity of the moment. Richard Hayes leaped to his feet one final time. "Objection! A child cannot provide reliable evidence. The dog's behavior is circumstantial." The judge's gaze was piercing. "Objection noted. The witness will continue." Ava's tiny voice rose above the tension. "He lied," she shouted. Coda growled louder, stepping forward as if to reinforce her declaration physically. The courtroom collectively gasped. Officers, reporters, and attorneys froze. The atmosphere was thick with suspense, every eye fixed on the child and the dog. Marissa gripped Ava tightly. Tears pricked her eyes. Her daughter had exposed a hidden truth that no adult had dared confront, and Coda's instincts amplified the credibility of every word. The ordinary rules of authority had been suspended. Only courage, clarity, and loyalty remained. David Ellison leaned closer to Ava. "Ava, can you show us what happened next?" Ava's finger traced an imaginary line in the air. He ran. Coda followed. He stopped him. Her tiny gestures brought the events to life in a courtroom filled with disbelief and awe. The room was silent except for the low, deliberate growl of Coda, a physical testament to the truth being revealed. Officer Bennington's jaw tightened. His hands shook. Every instinct screamed at him that his lies were unraveling, that the child and the dog had exposed him in a way he could not contain. The courtroom held its collective breath, waiting for the inevitable collapse of his facade. Ava repeated with unwavering clarity, "He lied." Coda stopped him. "He lied." Coda growled again, stepping closer to Ava, a living affirmation of her words. Every person in the courtroom felt the weight of truth pressing down on them, impossible to ignore, undeniable in its force. The judge leaned forward, voice calm but firm. "Mr. Bennington, this is your final opportunity to answer the witness questions truthfully." Bennington's face was pale, beads of sweat rolling down his temples. His jaw clenched, and for a long moment no words came. Coda growled again, stepping forward slightly, his massive body a living symbol of truth. The courtroom waited, suspended in anticipation. Ava's tiny voice cut through the silence. "He lied." The words echoed through the room, resonating with clarity, conviction, and undeniable truth. The courtroom erupted. Reporters whispered frantically into microphones. Officers shifted nervously, and the judge leaned forward, her expression a mixture of astonishment and authority. The alignment between a child's courage and a dog's instinct had shattered deception, exposed lies, and commanded justice. Marissa's chest heaved as she held her daughter. Ava had done the impossible, exposed deceit, summoned courage, and with Coda by her side, created a moment of reckoning no one in that courtroom would ever forget. The courtroom was poised on the brink of resolution. The lies had been revealed, the truth amplified, and the stage was set for the final confrontation that would determine the outcome of the case, and the fate of everyone involved. The courtroom held its collective breath, suspended between disbelief and revelation. The air was thick, almost tangible, as though every person present could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on them. Coda, the massive German shepherd, stood unwavering beside Ava, his low growl resonating through the polished wooden floors like a warning and a promise at once. The dog's body was taut, muscles coiled like springs, eyes locked on Officer Bennington. There was no mistaking it. Coda was a living testament to Ava's words. Marissa Carter gripped the edge of her chair, her knuckles white, her chest tight. Her daughter, so tiny, so fragile, had become a beacon of truth in a room dominated by adults. Ava's small voice, clear and unwavering, had exposed lies, deceit, and cowardice that no official report could capture. Every time she repeated the phrase, "He lied," it struck like a hammer against the walls of denial and pretense. David Ellison, the prosecutor, leaned forward, a careful smile on his face but his eyes sharp and intense. "Ava," he said gently, "can you show us exactly what happened after Coda stopped him?" Ava's lips pressed together, and for a moment silence fell over the room. Then, with deliberate gestures, she traced the path the man had taken. "He ran. Coda chased. He barked. He stopped him," she said, her small voice unflinching. Every motion, every word, painted a picture so vivid that the courtroom felt as though it had been transported back to that night. Bennington's face was pale. Sweat trickled down his temple. He tugged on Coda's leash with all his strength, whispering commands, but the dog ignored him completely. Coda's loyalty had shifted irrevocably, aligning with the child whose courage had dismantled years of falsehoods. Bennington realized in that moment that he had no control, not over Coda, not over the courtroom, and certainly not over the truth. Richard Hayes, the defense attorney, attempted one last show of authority. Objection. The child is too young. This testimony is unreliable. The dog's behavior is circumstantial. The judge's gaze was piercing, unyielding. Objection noted, she said. The witness will continue. Ava's tiny eyes met the judge's, unwavering, fearless. He lied, she repeated again, louder, her voice carrying a weight that could not be denied. Coda growled, a deep rumble that filled the room, a physical echo of her words. The courtroom seemed to vibrate under the combined force of innocence and instinct. Marissa's chest tightened as tears streamed down her face. Her daughter had not only survived a terrifying event, but had also become the instrument of its exposure. Every person in the courtroom could feel it. The ordinary rules of decorum, authority, and fear no longer applied. Only truth, courage, and instinct remained. David Ellison carefully brought forward a set of photographs showing the man attempting to flee. Ava, do you see him? Ava pointed deliberately. Yes, he ran. Coda stopped him. The officers near Bennington shifted uncomfortably. Some gripped their notebooks tightly. Others glanced at one another, unsure of how to respond. Even the court reporters, typically detached, paused mid-sentence to witness the extraordinary alignment of child and canine revealing the truth. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Bennington, you are ordered to answer directly. Do not attempt to avoid these questions. Bennington's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Sweat glistened on his forehead. His authority, once absolute, had crumbled. Coda growled low and insistent, stepping closer to Ava, his massive body a living barrier and a living witness. Ava's small voice rang out crystal clear. He lied. The courtroom gasped. A tension so thick it seemed to pulse like electricity filled the room. Officers shifted, some taking instinctive half-steps back. Reporters scribbled frantically, capturing every moment. The judge's eyes narrowed, her hands clasped tightly together. The extraordinary scene had unfolded. A 3-year-old girl, unwavering and courageous, and a police dog, instinctive and loyal, had seized control of truth itself. David Ellison continued carefully, guiding Ava. Ava, what did Coda do next? Ava lifted her tiny hands, gesturing precisely. He barked. He chased. He stopped him. He didn't move until he came out. Her gestures translated complex movements into clear, comprehensible narrative, leaving no room for doubt. Coda growled, stepping slightly forward, reinforcing her story physically. Bennington's hands shook violently. He realized his lies were no longer defensible. His career, credibility, and the careful construction of his authority were collapsing before him, exposed by the unlikeliest of witnesses, a toddler and a dog. Richard Hayes leapt to his feet one final time. Objection. The child cannot testify. The dog's behavior is circumstantial evidence at best. The judge's voice was firm, unwavering. Objection noted. The witness will continue. Ava's tiny voice rose above the tension. He lied, she shouted. The words echoed through the courtroom like a verdict in themselves. Coda growled louder, stepping closer, his massive form reinforcing her declaration. The tension reached a crescendo. Marissa felt her chest constrict. Her daughter had revealed a hidden truth that adults had desperately tried to conceal. Coda's instincts amplified every word, every gesture, every claim. The courtroom was now a crucible of justice, courage, and truth, where lies could no longer survive. David Ellison, sensing the final moment, leaned forward. Ava, can you show the court where the man tried to hide? Ava's small finger traced a path across a diagram, pointing to a shadowed corner. Here, she said firmly. Coda found him, he lied. The courtroom erupted. The tension cracked like glass. Reporters whispered and scribbled furiously. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. Even the judge, composed but astonished, leaned forward, absorbing the weight of the moment. Bennington's facade was gone. Coda's growl and Ava's fearless testimony had exposed the truth with an unshakable force. Marissa gripped Ava's hand tightly, tears streaming freely now. Her daughter had not only survived but had become a hero, a force of truth in a world that often overlooked innocence. The courtroom recognized it. Everyone present felt it. The judge's voice finally cut through the noise, calm yet authoritative. The court finds that the evidence presented, including the testimony of the child and the actions of the K-9, substantiates the claims of deceit and obstruction. Officer Bennington's statements are hereby noted as unreliable, and further investigation will proceed accordingly. The words hung in the room like thunder. Bennington's jaw tightened, his face pale and taut. The gravity of exposure settled on him like a weight he could not escape. Coda growled one last time, his body relaxed slightly but still alert, as if to signal victory and protection for the tiny figure who had guided him. Marissa bent down, hugging Ava tightly. "You did it, sweetheart," she whispered, voice choked with emotion. Ava's small arms wrapped around her mother, a mixture of triumph and relief washing over her tiny frame. The child had faced fear, revealed truth, and commanded justice, her courage amplified by the unwavering loyalty of a dog who understood instinctively what needed to be done. The courtroom slowly began to exhale. Reporters continued scribbling, officers shifted nervously, and the judge tapped her gavel lightly, restoring a semblance of order. But the room had been changed forever. Everyone present had witnessed something extraordinary. A toddler and a dog exposing lies, revealing truth, and commanding justice in a way that defied authority and expectation. Coda sat beside Ava, his massive head resting gently on her lap. The dog's eyes, alert yet calm, reflected understanding, pride, and unwavering loyalty. Ava giggled softly, a tiny sound filled with relief and triumph. The courtroom, for all its formality and authority, had become a testament to courage, instinct, and the power of truth. Marissa whispered, voice trembling, "You saved everyone, Ava. You were so brave." Ava looked up, her small face glowing with pride. "Coda helped," she said simply. The two of them, child and dog, had become an inseparable force of justice, an embodiment of courage that would be remembered long after the trial ended. As the gavel fell for the final time, the courtroom erupted in quiet acknowledgement. Cameras flashed, pens scratched, and every person present understood the magnitude of what they had witnessed. Lies had been exposed, courage had been celebrated, and a tiny voice had spoken a truth that could not be ignored. And as Marissa lifted Ava from the witness chair, the little girl whispered again to Coda, "Good job, buddy." The dog's tail wagged slowly, his eyes softening. Together, they had changed the outcome of a case, exposed deceit, and left an indelible mark on every person who had been in that room. Justice had prevailed, not through authority, not through fear, but through courage, loyalty, and the unwavering truth of a 3-year-old and a dog who refused to back down.